10 underrated cannibal horror movies of the 80s and the 90s that went too far. Mark Hewitt once wrote, "To see the world in a way that is different than the way everyone else sees it is pure genius. It is also insanity." And that's quite what cannibalism is, isn't it? I mean, what is that driving force that made Hannibal Lecter the great villain he is? Was it simply his bloodthirsty nature veiled by his sophistication? No. It was the fact that he was killing and eating people. After all, you are what you eat. The 80s and 90s were the glorious 2 decades as far as cannibal exploitation films were concerned, and while a few were digestible, others were too much to chew. In this video, we will explore the 10 most underrated cannibal horror movies that blur the line between art and violence. A few of these movies have real animal killings in them, so here's your trigger warning. Let's begin, shall we? Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Eaten Alive, 1980. New York City is shocked when 2 people are murdered by a cultist who uses darts tipped with cobra venom to carry out the murders. It soon becomes clear that the murderer was from the remote corners of New Guinea. A few days later, the sister of a woman named Sheila mysteriously disappears. Sheila joins hands with Mark to find her sister, and the 2 of them end up in a camp run by Jonas, a cult leader who inflicts all kinds of abuse on his followers and others. But that's not it. Sheila and Mark will have to survive a tribe of violent cannibals who would do anything to get what they want. Umberto Lenzi's film is a stereotypically sleazy cannibal film that muses with the age-old idea of native young people entering a jungle that they do not fully understand. Ivan Rasimov as Jonas is the only saving grace for this otherwise wild and brutal flick. Speaking of wild and brutal, there's enough gore to creep out the strongest minds. For instance, in one of the scenes, a group of cannibals eat a dead woman, but their favorite part, it seems, were the teats of the dead woman. Not just human bodies were ripped open and devoured, but also animals. Despite not being as good as films like Cannibal Holocaust, Eaten Alive remains rather true to its intended purpose and could be called a relatively tamer entry on the list. Oh, and by the way, you'll find a lot of Sri Lankans here because a great chunk of the film was shot in Sri Lanka. Ravenous, 1999. In the mid-19th century, John Boyd, a second lieutenant of the United States Army, captured a Mexican command post during the Mexican-American War, but he achieved this feat by a cowardly act of playing dead. Outraged by this, General Slauson transfers him as a punishment to a remote military outpost named Fort Spencer in the Sierra Nevada, which is led by the genial but weary commanding officer, Colonel Hart. Boyd finds himself amongst a bunch of strange misfits in the name of soldiers. Soon enough, a stranger named Colhoun arrives at the fort and narrates his terrible experience. His wagon got lost in the mountains, and his colleagues were stranded for almost 3 months. Struck by starvation, they resorted to cannibalism. Immediately after, a search party is formed to rescue the survivors, but a Native American named George tells the men about a Wendigo myth that whenever a person eats another, they get the strengths of whom they eat, but also become addicted to more human flesh. The soldiers reach a cave and find dead remains of human skeletons, but it seems that they themselves will have to indulge in cannibalism to survive. Starring the likes of Guy Pearce and David Arquette, the movie is loosely based on and inspired by the Donner Party, which was a group of Americans stuck in the snowy mountains of Sierra Nevada. Stranded for days, their supplies had run off, and they were forced to devour each other to survive. But another interesting influence could be the infamous Colorado Cannibal or Alfred Packer. Despite being a film on a gruesome subject like cannibalism, director Antonia Bird gave the film a darkly humorous tone, making Ravenous an exhilarating dark comedy. But the one reason why you should watch it is the film's handling of subjects like cannibalism and vampirism, without relying too heavily on either of the subjects. This unique flick has all kinds of dark sequences, each more chilling and entertaining than the other. In one of the scenes, people eat raw flesh, while in another, they cook themselves bowls of fresh and warm human stew. If you can stomach these and a lot more, you'll be rewarded with a uniquely crafted movie. Good luck. Cannibal Holocaust, 1980. When an American film crew disappears in the Amazon rainforest, a New York anthropologist named Harold Monroe agrees to lead a search and rescue team to get the film crew back. The military also abducted a young male from the local Yakumo tribe, so that he could be used when it was time to negotiate with the tribals when such an opportunity arrived. And although Monroe manages to locate the Yakumo village, he is shocked to learn that the film crew committed horrific crimes against the tribals to shoot the documentary, and it only left the tribals furious. Later, Monroe finds two warring tribes of cannibals, the Yanomamo and the Shamatari. When he saves a young Yanomamo from a certain death, he is invited by the elders. But what will become the fate of Monroe? What did the film crew do in the jungles? And will the crew ever be rescued? First things first, Cannibal Holocaust probably set the stage for footage-found masterpieces like The Blair Witch Project and many other movies to come. But that's not why the movie is remembered, right? To put it in simple terms, Cannibal Holocaust is an utterly violent and distasteful film that even hardcore fans of the exploitation genre would shy away from watching a second time. The bloody deaths are profoundly scary, especially the gruesome impalement scene of a local woman on a stick. Director Ruggero Deodato did not care about putting any restraints whatsoever, but more importantly, he effectively created a film that questions who the real savages were. Was it the cannibals hunting and eating others? Or was it the apparently educated and civilized film crew? I guess you'll have to find that out on your own.
Everything's fine, Mom. Just an air pocket.
Mom, it scared me too.
Alive, 1993. This Frank Marshall film kicks off with Stella Maris College's Old Christians rugby team that was being flown by a Uruguayan Air Force plane to Chile for an upcoming match. However, on October 13, 1972, the plane collided with a mountain after emerging from the clouds. Although the plane did not explode, it slid down the mountain before stopping. While a few of the crew members and passengers perished, few survived, and thus began a journey of pain, misery, and death. The survivors initially depended on the meager supply of chocolates, etc., but once that ran out, they didn't know what to eat to survive. After great arguments and debates, it was finally decided that the survivors would devour their dead relatives and friends in a bid to keep from starving. But their struggles did not end there. The survivors would have to face extremely harsh weather. The film is essentially based on Paul Reed's novel, Alive, the story of the Andes survivors. An ambition and grounded adaptation, the 1993 film lives and breathes in the same air as the actual victims of the plane crash that took place in the October of 1972. I would say that Alive is more of a drama than a horror film, so much so that it puts several well-known drama movies to shame. Frank Marshall's handling of human emotions in times of desperations is commendable because its characters gain power from being humane instead of heroic. And if you have ever imagined what would happen if your plane crashed on a snowy mountain, you should watch this one and take some serious notes.
What are we eating? Leftovers, honey. Leftovers from what?
Parents, 1989. The Lemley family, including Nick, Lily, and their youngest son Michael, moved from Massachusetts to California and reside in a suburban neighborhood. Young Michael has always been socially awkward and has consistent horrific nightmares, like his bed collapsing in a pool of blood. To make things worse, Michael sees his parents rocking the bed and assumes that they are biting into each other. When he sees his father cutting open a corpse at work, his belief that his parents are cannibals strengthens. Oh, and there were some dismembered body parts hanging from the metal hooks in their basement. But when the guidance counselor goes with Michael to the house to convince him that he imagined things about his parents, they actually find a corpse, and Millie is killed. Later that night, Nick tries to feed his son some meat that possibly came from a human and assures him that he would develop a taste for it, much like Lily did. It's later revealed that cannibalism in the Lemley family might just be hereditary. But will Michael survive? Clearly, Bob Balaban's film is a fresh take on the subject of cannibalism, even from a modern point of view. The film suggests that cannibalism is passed down to children from their parents, and such a dark theme is probably the most potent factor behind the film's inclusion on this list. To sum it up, Parents is a beautifully made film about subjects that are not so beautiful. Apart from the cannibalism aspect, it deals with how children see the world changing around them and the effects that parents may have on them. It should be on your viewing list if you haven't watched it already.
Vincent?
Motel Hell. 1980. Vincent Smith and his sister, Ida, are essentially farmers, just that instead of growing crops, they trap humans and bury them neck-deep in their secret garden, where these human crops are fed until they are ready and ripe enough to be harvested for the renowned smoked meat that Vincent sells in his motel. And since Ida also sees humans as nothing but animals, she helps her brother in everything he does. Despite the fact that Vincent's brother is a sheriff, Vincent manages to continue his killings, but things take a jog to the left when Vincent brings in a young girl named Terry to the motel instead of placing her in the garden. Not only does the move irritate Ida, Vincent and Terry are preparing to get married. But what will be the fate of Terry when she learns who her would-be husband really is? Will Sheriff Bruce ever sniff what his brother is actually cooking? Nevertheless, the film almost feels like the progeny spawned by the sinful union of movies like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Psycho, except that it is injected with gratuitous amounts of dark comedy and satire. In fact, for a movie that's partly satire, Motel Hell is pretty gory, but I must admit that it could have been much better. Loaded with sharp visual details and interesting characters who do not think of their crimes as crimes, Motel Hell should be on any movie buff's watch list. Delicatessen, 1991. It's post-apocalyptic France, food is scarce, and people are starving. Amidst such a setting, the movie introduces a butcher and landlord named Clapet, who lures innocent job seekers and kills them so that he can sell their meat to various tenants. One day, an unemployed circus clown named Louison sees the newspaper advertisement offering a job and comes to Clapet to fill the vacant position. Of course, Clapet hires Louison, but doesn't kill him because of Louison's exceptional skills with the knife. But Clapet probably waited for too long because his young daughter, Julie, fell in love with Louison. Fearing for her lover's life, she escaped to a group of feared and dangerous vegetarian rebels named the Troglodytes. They offer help, but would that be enough? In a battle between love and cannibalism, would Julie and Louison become collateral damage? The film is quite unique in its setting and themes. Despite being set in a post-apocalyptic world, it is a reminder of the troubled times that the Frenchmen experienced before their grand old revolution of 1789. And naturally, Delicatessen is largely a brutal and bloody ode to the decadence of society as a whole and the loss of culture. It tends to serve as a reflection of the world where all morality has disappeared and people have become nothing less than animals. Personally, it is one of the more intelligent cannibal movies out there. Cannibal Ferox, 1981. Three young friends named Gloria, Rudy, and Pat set foot into a rainforest to prove to Gloria that cannibalism was a myth. The three of them end up meeting a couple of drug dealers, one of whom was severely injured. It's revealed that one of these guys got so high on cocaine that he ended up murdering a local guide, and the tribals who once trusted the foreigners had snapped and turned against them. Now, their only agenda was seeking revenge, and of course, eating their enemies. Gloria, Rudy, and Pat became entangled in this fight between criminals and cannibals. But all is not lost because not every cannibal is a bad guy, and some of them want to help the three friends. With paper-thin plot but great gore, this 1981 film is a less intelligent adaptation of the cannibal holocaust that released the previous year. Cannibal Ferox is loaded with over-the-top scenes of mastification and mutilation, including a scene where people collectively eat the brain of a victim. Much like Cannibal Holocaust, it is the civilized humans who bring about the doom by hurting and angering the locals, who often believe that cannibalism is as good as a punishment as any. While the showcase of the pathetic primitive practice is far from poor, director Umberto Lenzi could have done better. Cut and Run, 1985. A Vietnam War veteran named Brian Horn leads a cult-like cannibal army that he uses to wage war against Colombian drug cartels. Colonel Horn and his activities were being closely monitored by a reporter named Fran Hudson when her boss's son gets kidnapped by one of the cartels. Naturally, she takes a deeper interest in the case and takes off with a cameraman to find the culprits. But she doesn't know what she was getting into. It doesn't even take a minute for the cannibal leader to capture the reporter, but theme again, she had previously intended to interview Horn. Hudson's boss sends in mercenaries to get his son back, but a firefight ensues, and the cannibal leader suffers from a bullet shot in the gut. He agrees to interview Hudson, but Colonel Horn has something else in mind. Well, let's just say that he was a disciple of Jim Jones, the American activist and mass murderer. The film is amazing. I mean, it's no challenger for the Best Picture at the Academy Awards, but it's thrilling to watch. As far as Italian exploitations films go, Cut and Run had a more complex plot than any, and more than a cannibal movie. It felt like an action thriller with a lot of blow darts, dismemberment, shooting, guts spilling out, and crimes against women. Having said that, it is quite clean for a cannibal film simply because it doesn't quite show any real animal killings, and there's no castration on screen. Cannibal Apocalypse, 1980. The film has a rather interesting premise, but of course, it was another exploitation film made by the Italians in the early 80s, so there's not much to expect. The film begins with a flashback to when Norman Hopper was sent to rescue American prisoners of war. He was disgusted to see these men consuming raw human flesh, and one of them, Charlie Bukowski, bites Hopper. It turns out that Charlie was infected with the virus that left people craving human flesh. Many years later, Norman has managed to curb his cannibalistic urges and lives with his wife, but he doesn't shy away from sleeping with younger women. During one such encounter, he gets a phone call from his old friend Charlie, who has now been released from the mental institution, but once Hopper meets Charlie, he gives in to his urges. What happens next is a gruesome tale of blood, flesh, and raw massacre. Have you ever watched Predator or Predator 2? Well, the first one was set in a real jungle and the second in a concrete jungle. Similarly, Cannibal Apocalypse takes the road not taken by most cannibal movies and brings the action to a concrete jungle. And the cannibals are not some semi-naked tribals who hunt with spears and darts, but these are American soldiers who are trained in combat. That's probably the most interesting aspect of the film, apart from the fact that John Saxon, who played Norman Hopper, wanted an out from the film after learning that it was an exploitation film. But he could not do that because he had already signed the film. And that's why you saw that actor, who starred in more than 200 films, give a lousy performance. There's something about cannibalism that intrigues us all. You may hate the subject or love to read about cannibalistic serial killers, but you cannot ignore this pathetic practice. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.